Hi, good evening. I'd like to welcome you to Poem Praise 2, and peace and blessings be upon you and your family this evening. Now, we are going to get right back into No Man Can A-Hinder Me. Currently, right now, we're on chapter 63. Now, this is the last chapter of this book. We're making it to the final chapter of No Man Can A-Hinder Me. Now, the title of this chapter is entitled Fact and Fiction. So, without further ado, chapter 63 reads as such. During the last several decades, I've been analyzing the causes of white America's contempt and our fear of black people. I've found that the negative feelings usually go one way: non-blacks against blacks. The black reaction to the contempt or fear is just that, a reaction. Black people are programmed from infancy to feel positive about nearly everything white, including and especially people. In addition to the inherent amygdala, and contempt and our fear of black people is based on a number of myths which I hope to dispel here by logic and documentation. Hopefully, this chapter will help us to undertake the seemingly uphill battle for truth, unity, and cultural understanding. The following statements and research are based on the knowledge of there being no absolutes. But generally speaking, the information can be substantiated. If you have doubts, take some time to observe where you shop, live, or go to school. There are several categories of the contempt and our fear fiction. The Emancipation Proclamation, EP, freed black people from slavery. Fact. The so-called Emancipation Proclamation was a farce that freed no one. The freedom of captives in the southern states would have had to be enforced by Confederate soldiers who obviously refused to do so. The real purpose of the EP was to overturn the laws of the Black Code, which prohibited black people from serving in the armed forces. A presidential proclamation was warranted by the Constitution upon military necessity. The military necessity was the North was losing the war. Over 500,000 black people participated on the side of the North in their freedom fight. Included were 217,000 soldiers and sailors who fought in 204 battles, winning 21 Congressional Medals of Honor. Here are two fascinating facts of black participation in the war against the South, which are previously unknown. 300,000 black folks built the bridges, roads, and fortifications used by the Northern armies. In addition, They acted as espionage agents, one of which was the major conductor of the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman. Captives in the house would send war secrets heard to women outdoors, who transmitted the information by a predetermined way of hanging clothes online in the plantation fields. That information could then be transmitted to the Union forces by drum or by spirituals or message songs. At the conclusion of the war between the states, erroneously labeled the Civil War, President Lincoln and his generals acknowledged that a huge number of black men who bravely bore arms actually won the war for the North. France also recognized this as a fact by creating and presenting to the United States the Statue of Liberty in 1885. Now you know why. The majestic statue that towers over Ellis Island was presented with the following words: in commemoration of a captive people who, for the first time in history, freed themselves. Fiction. The fear and or contempt of black people by white people is a conditioned reflex. Fact. The amygdala triggers alarm and fear when it sees someone of a different race. In parentheses, see Time magazine, October 20th, 2008. End parentheses. Fiction. The ancestral home of most African Americans was a jungle. Fact. Their ancestral home was the West African Songhai Empire, which was made up of university cities, iron and steel, factories, beautiful homes, and tree-lined avenues. Fiction. The African American homeland was void of literary sophistication. Fact. In the early decades of 2000, thousands of trunks buried 400 years earlier were found around the city of Timbuktu. The trunks filled with books, manuscripts of science, medicine, and law treatises. I think I said that correctly, y'all. I'm going to spell it for you. Treaties of literature proved the world-class literacy of African American ancestors. Fiction. Black people are poor. Fact. African Americans spend $900 billion a year, a sum that exceeds that of Canada and 3 other countries. Unfortunately, $120 billion is spent on hair products, cars, clothes, and food, and only $40.5 billion on health, insurance, education, and books. In parentheses, the source for that fact is Target Market News and the SELIG, SELIG, Center for Economic Growth, in parentheses. Fiction. Blacks are less intelligent than whites. Fact. According to the Association for the Advancement of Science, headquarters at Yale University, in its 1996 series, Blacks in America are 150% smarter than Europeans. This analysis is based on the measurements of the DNA series of both groups. The greater the number of the DNA series, the greater the probability of genius. Blacks in America have 9 DNA series, as compared to Europeans, who only have 6. The chimpanzee has 5. Fiction. There is no proof of African ancient literacy and mathematical knowledge. Fact number 1. A 9,000-year-old vase was discovered in ancient Egypt, Kemet, with the words fraction 1/2 inscribed on it. The first book by Europeans, Homer, wasn't written until more than 6,000 years later. Fact number 2. Pages of the creation of algebra 3,700 or 3,700 years ago in ancient Egypt by a black African, Ames, A-H-M-E-S, can be found in his book in the British Museum today. Europeans didn't find out about algebra until about 1,500 years later, according to the World Book Encyclopedia. Fiction. Blacks are more violent than whites. Fact. Europeans are most violent and aggressive of all races, according to the 15th edition of Encyclopedia Britannica, page 600. Also, The Iceman Inheritance by Michael Bradley documents the wars and killings of the last 5 centuries attributed to the white race. Fiction. Blacks are closer to the ape in evolution. Fact. Color of skin. Chimpanzees and whites. White. Types of hair. Chimpanzees and whites. Straight. Undeveloped. Blacks. Tightly curled. Developed. Infestation of hair. Chimpanzees and whites. Head lice. Blacks. No head lice. Bodily hair. Chimpanzees and whites. Profuse. Blacks. Scant. Facial features. Chimpanzees and whites. Thin lips. Narrow noses. Close set eyes. Large ears. Blacks. Full lips. Broad noses. Wide set eyes and small ears. Bodily build. Chimpanzees and whites. Long bodies. Short legs. Undeveloped muscles. Muscles. Blacks. Short bodies. Long legs. Developed buttock muscles. The information above is not an attempt to make white people feel badly. The untruths, fear, and contempt fostered by whites against blacks through the centuries have been used to justify the astronomical profits earned by the captors on the blood, sweat, tears, and lives of our mothers and fathers. So herein, to my knowledge, is the first time the denunciations, C-I-A-T-I-O-N-S. Oh, Lord, y'all. Denunciations. Denunciations of Black people have been answered in a comprehensive way. That does complete chapter 63. So stay tuned for the conclusion. It be at thy will, I'll come back to you with the conclusion. So I want for you to be well, take care, and be blessed. It be at thy will. I will speak to you soon here on Poem Praise 2. So until next time, later, y'all.